Welcome back to another episode of Real Women, where we explore the issues facing the modern day Catholic woman and how we can navigate these seasons with grace and purpose. My name is Karen Doyle.
And I'm Hosking, and you are watching Real Women. In this episode, we're going to be exploring the impact of pornography in the lives of women when their significant partner has a problem. Karen, we've seen this a lot come up at sisterhood conferences. Yes. I think it's because it creates a bit of a safe space for them to share and feel comfortable, because it is an issue that people do suffer in silence a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this issue of, particularly in marriages, I've found that when women are coming to sisterhood conference, they're there in an environment that is safe, but they really start to encounter their own heart. Yeah. And God sort of works and the Holy Spirit starts to move. And over recent years, we found that this is becoming one of the preeminent pastoral care issues, is really helping women navigate a season once they discover that their husband or their boyfriend, sometimes even their dad, is looking at pornography and the impact that this has on their heart and their relationships. And what I've found walking pastorally with women is that so many of them are suffering in silence. There's a lot of shame that surrounds this particular issue, and there's a lot of shame because they don't know who to talk to. Yeah. They also don't want to betray their husbands, and they just don't know where to go. Yeah. I do know some of the men that I dated many years ago, it was an issue for them, and it does impact you. Yeah. And I have a little bit of an insight from that, but then walking with women pastorally has been really eye-opening. Yeah. And just realising how inadequate some of our services are, how inadequate sometimes the response in the church can be to these women.
Yeah, it's almost something that people don't want to talk about.
Yes, or that they're not skilled as well. They don't quite know how to deal with the issue. Because often we have the man whose sin is pornography and his addiction and his challenge is pornography. But how do we walk alongside him? How do we support the women? Because it's not a private sin. No. And one of the great myths around pornography is that what you do in private doesn't impact anybody else.
Absolutely. But it really does, doesn't it?
It totally does, because what you see impacts you, and then how that impacts you, it shapes your attitudes, and then you take those attitudes into your relationships and your behaviours that sort of come out of that.
So we've got that ongoing effect of one individual sin leading to another, leading to the impact of consequence in the marriage and the family, and then that surrounding community. Like it's really an issue that robs and steals and destroys.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of the greatest cancers in our society. You and I both have sons as well. So it's not just in marriages, but really forming young people. We also see young girls in high school thinking that they need to act out scripts from pornography. We need to start bringing these conversations to the light. We need to start while our kids are young. Yeah. We need to be talking about it so that people aren't suffering in silence. Yeah. And the reality is, when this does become an issue for men, often it can become compulsive, but then it can actually become an addiction. Yeah. Pornography addiction is actually in the same sort of category as drug and alcohol addiction. Yeah. So it's not a matter of just going to confession, asking forgiveness for your sin. Yeah, okay. We actually need to be walking through steps of recovery. Yeah. And women need to also, when they've been impacted by this and devastated by this, they too need a recovery program that's targeted for them, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Joining us in the studio today, we have Philipa Caulfield.
Philipa Caulfield is a specialised peer support group facilitator. She follows the multi-dimensional partner trauma model and runs safe support groups for women experiencing trauma due to the effects of their husband's sexual addiction. A previous senior business executive who has managed premium and luxury global brands in Australia, Philippa has been married to Luke for 19 years and has 4 precious children. Philippa and her husband Luke have been mentoring couples preparing for marriage for 15 years.
Welcome, Philippa, to this conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
So good to have you. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your background.
So obviously, being part of sisterhood, I've attended all the conferences, so that's been a joy in my life, and I've mentored young women as well. And through the sisterhood conferences, have heard time and time again women sharing they've discovered their husband has a problem with pornography or has been viewing pornography. And so, you know, that experience, along with the work, my husband and I have been mentoring couples for nearly 15 years in preparing to be married. So, those experiences combined, hearing this pain that women were experiencing, I just wanted to help. I wanted to try and find a way to help. And so when I went looking for information, I came across betrayal trauma, and what that explained was exactly what these women were sharing with me and what they were experiencing. So from there, I undertook some specialised training, and so I now run support groups for women who've experienced betrayal trauma.
Yeah. Can you unpack what is betrayal trauma? I know you've talked about it just then, but
Sure.
Can you unpack this a bit more, and why is it important that women are trauma informed?
Look, trauma essentially is described as someone's emotional experience to a distressing event. Distressing events can happen all the time, and we have, what I would call crises in life. We get a new job, we move house, we have a baby. Even though they're good things, they're generally foreseen. We know about them. Yeah. Trauma happens, or a traumatic event, is when something is unforeseen. So it happens to us. So think about being made redundant, or receiving a significant health diagnosis. A car crash is a good example. It happens to you. You're not expecting it, it's unforeseen. And so there's still an experience of that. You're still experiencing the trauma of the event. Obviously, it's quite an emotional experience, but you still then have to deal with the effects. Yeah. So if we look at trauma as that experience, it's an emotional response to an unforeseen circumstance. Betrayal trauma specifically is the experience of, I'm going to say a woman in this case, a wife who's discovered that her husband or significant other, it's that very close relational bond, has betrayed them in some way.
My experience has been there's many women who actually discover their husband or their boyfriend are using pornography many, many, many years into their marriage, and they literally had no idea. And so the depth of betrayal after many years of sharing a life, a marriage, you realise it's been built on a bit of a lie.
It is.
And that's what's also particularly shattering.
Oh, Karen, the word shatter is absolutely exactly what it is, because it's someone's sense of reality, what they thought they had in a relationship, in a marriage, in a parental relationship, is completely gone in an instant. So it's definitely a hit to them, and that sense of self is absolutely gone. Women their whole worlds have been turned upside down, and it is an emotional freefall for them. They really it's almost like they really are falling, and they just don't know what to hold on to. Everything that they knew and that they thought was real and good and true is gone.
Yeah. And this is the one thing I think we've all sort of experienced at Sisterhood, looking at these women, this free fall, and there's no goalposts. No. And I think that's wonderful what you're actually doing here, because I know back in 10 years ago when I started working with women in this area, I looked around for counsellors, psychologists, resources, and there literally was nothing.
Yeah.
I sort of developed, that I developed this recovery for her in that initial phase of discovery, what women can do, what's happening. And I love what you're doing, because it's walking with people, because it's such a journey to walk out of this.
Oh, you're right, Karen. It is a journey. Even though something as devastating as discovering that, your significant other person in your life, most cases a husband has a problem with pornography, because it's generally not a once-off discovery. It's a once-off discovery the first time it's discovered.
So, explain betrayal trauma, because I'm interested in the model of that, as opposed to, because that ties into the one-off.
It does.
But then the multiple traumas that follow.
That's right. It is a journey. And so, look, the training that I've done really does focus on, that this experience of betrayal trauma, of discovering your husband has a problem, it's multifaceted. It affects every single area of your life: emotional, physical, spiritual, sexual, absolutely everything. And so the model that I've worked with and understand means that if we understand why a woman is experiencing this, we can then help her heal. And so those experiences really do, in a first instance, they need to be supported, they need to be acknowledged, they need to be heard. So the work that, essentially I do and that I offer is to support women on their journey. So there are first steps that they need to undertake. Yeah. And you mentioned the secrecy and the shame. There is a huge amount of shame with this particular issue for so many different reasons, and a lot of that shame stops women from seeking help.
Yes, it does.
They keep silent.
I think you've touched on it right there. It's not, because it's not the woman's sin, it's hard to talk about. I think it's when it's our own sin, we are more able to discuss it with someone. Even if there is a lot of shame, it might be hard to talk about it, but we can own it for ourselves. But we're talking about someone who's very special, really important to us, about their really deep sin.
Yes.
It's an uncomfortable place.
It's a very uncomfortable place. And, you know, there's really probably only, if people are fortunate to maybe have a handful of people in their life that they might be able to share that with. And not only that, knowing where to go for help.
Yes.
10 years ago, Karen, betrayal trauma was not a term. It is around about 2006 is when the term was identified and coined because of the physical and emotional and spiritual experiences women discovering this had. So it is that significant. It's now, you know, been coined a term, and there is now this multi-dimensional approach to trauma to say, you know, what happened to you? Not why are you doing these things? Why are you so emotionally unstable? Why do you have so much brain fog? You know, why can't you, you know, make daily decisions? You know, why all of these experiences, it's like something happened to you. What happened to you? How can we help you heal? You weren't aware of this occurring.
But if there's a woman who's in this experience, like what are some tips, I guess, that she can, or some ideas to get her started?
Yeah, look, I think releasing physical trauma, you know, from the body is really important. There's lots of different ways to do so, as individual as every woman probably. But look, crying is you know, the first, you know, that is a physical release of the body, and that's really important. There's a really beautiful process called lamenting, and you know, it's from scripture, and it's crying out to God and asking him why. We can ask that. How God is big enough to take that. So asking him why, allowing those tears to come, allowing that emotional expression, because it's physical through our body, our tears. You know, being in nature, whether you're a runner or you're really into physical exercise, that can be a good thing. Sometimes it's just a matter of being really gentle and going for a walk. And the Japanese call it forest bathing. Actually, just being in nature is actually very healing for us. So going for a walk, if you want to physically go for a run, then by all means. But then also, I think, you know, a physical manifestation really needs to be a really, I would say, I don't want to say aggressive, but something that requires a lot of energy. So whether it's boxing, whether it's punching a pillow, whether it's kicking, whether it's, you know, going for a strong run. You know, if you're a dance class, it's really going to, you know, get your heart up. But it needs to be a physical release, you know, through the body.
For women who are listening to this for the first time, say the concept, the term betrayal trauma, they've never heard before, they're listening to this and it's resonating deeply in them. What are some first steps? You know, first thing they can do from right here, watching this now. What's something they can do?
Look, if it's a bit of an aha moment for someone at home, they might be very emotional. And I would say first thing, be really gentle with yourself. This is new information if you're hearing it for the first time. And so just being really gentle with yourself, allowing the emotional experience just to come. But I would say if you're just sitting there, just allow God to, you know, to be with you, allow the Holy Spirit to work in you, and just acknowledge what that is, and, you know, and ask God, say, God, lead me, where is it to next? Depending on where they are in the world, there is trained betrayal trauma specialists in most countries, but they do need, I would say the easiest way would be a bit of a Google search, to search for betrayal trauma. Betrayal trauma therapist. Because they will have specific experience and specific training to be able to guide these women, because they're in varying circumstances and so will need varying things. But the first step would really just be to acknowledge, be gentle with yourself, ask God to come into this, ask him to be with you and to lead you where to go next, and to definitely do a search for some specialised help.
I'm interested too, like a marriage that's been through this, like there are people who might leave their marriage, there might be people who stay. Can you walk us through how can a marriage actually recover from this level of betrayal? Because it sounds profound.
It is profound, and it almost sounds impossible that, you know, an experience like this, that a marriage could recover. What it requires is a lot of work.
What is that work?
Yes, it's horrifying and you know, humiliating work, but it needs to be done, and it's to be done by both. So where it first starts, obviously, for the woman is to get that specialised help, because depending on her circumstance will be the work that she needs to do. But we need to really look at ourselves. We're responsible for our own healing. Then for the husband, to whatever issues he might be dealing with, he needs to go and get specific help. Now, generally with addictions, that's through a qualified therapist or through a 12-step program. That's incredibly important, and that really does align with our Catholic faith. So it is a good and safe program. Only when that work is done is a couple then able to come together, because actually what they're doing is they're creating an entirely new marriage, because what she did not know and what he did not disclose, that was the previous marriage. There's a process called disclosure, and that process is really, really important. Now, we can have small disclosures, a discovery or someone tells us something, but in a therapeutic sense, a disclosure is a process with trained professionals, and the idea is drawing a line in the sand for the woman. But essentially what happens is the husband shares all of the behaviour. Right? So it's complete honesty, 100% truth. It's very obviously
pretty brutal.
A very brutal process. But the difference this time is that the woman is supported with a specialised therapist. Right. She goes through this process with them. It's a facilitated process.
Okay.
So it's not the same experience as when she first discovered. It is painful.
It's like mediated.
But absolutely, it's completely mediated. But then the woman has a chance to say how this has impacted her directly to her husband, or through all areas of her life. You know, this is
deep work.
This is very deep work. I know, I've just got goosebumps. Yeah. This is an experience of women, and I've seen them walk through this process where they are able to say the depth of pain that this has created and they have experienced.
Beautiful.
And from there, that experience allows a new marriage to happen. It doesn't work unless the husband does his work and the wife does her work. It doesn't work otherwise. But that experience is what allows a woman to then choose to move forward. Because in my experience working with women, the only marriages that don't survive are because they're not able to. And the reason they're not able to is because the husband hasn't made the commitment or the choice to get healthy. And to do the work.
It's so important. We spoke about this in our episode on marriage, about one of the keys to a healthy marriage is actually that receptivity to growth and the humility to growth. And I think marriages can't evolve unless both people are involved in that process.
Absolutely.
It's so important.
Yeah.
So there is a situation where some women, I think we look at marriages and always wanting to pursue them and wanting them to continue and commit.
Yes.
But what was your advice? What would you say to women who are in the situation where their partner is not doing the work?
Honestly, rely on the Lord.
Yeah.
Rely on the Lord. In my experience and with the therapists that I've worked with and the women that I've worked with, it's really been a situation where they will know when to make a decision when the time comes. No one's asking them to make a decision now. There's a current experience and circumstance they're in, and they need to be able to manage through that, keep themselves safe, healthy, try and process their own work. And if we're asking God into that process and we're relying on Him, He will give us the grace to be able to walk through whatever it is that we're going to be walking through, or whatever it is, that I've seen these ladies, walk through. We need to rely on Him. We need to bring Him into this process. But I would say that, she needs a lot of support in lots of different ways, emotional, physical, spiritual. If there is specialised help that she can get, generally they will have recommendations for her husband as well. Yeah. So it's a bit of a broad, explanation, Von, but that's because the situations are so different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's case by case, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It's tough. I think relying on the Lord, asking Him to provide you the grace will allow people to walk through.
We now have some burning questions for Philippa to really take us through a lot of what we have spoken about today, but some really quick questions with quick answers. What are your top tips for women who face betrayal?
First of all, to know it's not your fault.
Yeah.
Second would be to be very gentle with yourself. You are experiencing something really significant. And third would be to try and seek specialised help for it.
Great.
Why is pornography such a problem?
Pornography is a problem in so many different ways. But essentially for the man, the problem is because it completely devalues himself. And for the woman, she's being hypersexualised, she's being not valued for her body and for what she's worth as well.
Yeah. How can women deal with infidelity in their marriage?
Dealing with infidelity, and that is part of betrayal trauma as well, is being able to seek specialised help. It's acknowledging that it is a significant issue. It would be about understanding how it's occurred and putting steps in place to make sure it doesn't happen again.
How can women become trauma informed?
So women can become trauma-informed almost very simply by being empathetic. It's one of the gifts that we have as women, and so really utilising that gift. And being empathetic means that essentially you've got to connect with something in yourself to be able to connect with the other person. It's just letting them know that they've been seen, they're heard, and they're not alone.
From this couch, as they're hearing this message, what are first step or two steps that women can do who are experiencing or hearing this for the first time and realise that they need to go down this path?
So a quick Google search of betrayal trauma therapists will direct them to where they need to go in their particular location. Yeah. So that's the very first step. There's lots of support groups online, so no matter what country that they're in, they can access a support group even in a different country.
Thank you so much, Philippa.
You're
so
welcome.
Wonderful to have you joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So great.
Well, that brings us to the conclusion of this week's episode of Real Women. We really hope and pray that has been insightful for you, whether or not you're a woman who is actually going through betrayal trauma, or whether it just informs you about how you might come alongside other women that you encounter on the playground, in the workforce, anywhere.
Yeah, it's really important that we bring light to this topic, that shame really breeds in darkness. So when we bring something into the light, it just can't survive.
Absolutely.
That's why this discussion is so important.
It is. And I just want to finish with this beautiful quote by John Paul II, where he says, the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, but that it actually shows too little of what the human person really is. And so today we've really deep dived into how that impacts the woman as a human person. And we really want to encourage you to go deeper and to respond, I guess, to this message if that's an issue that you're facing.
My life is a miracle. Every child has a story of God's love to share. Shalom world, tune into God's love story.